I remember a chill running down my spine when Kai presented me with the invitation to his sleepover party. My best friend Sean had slept over the last year, and it was the last I saw of him. After 3 days of absent roll call, his neighbour told me they had moved to a different city. As the children of single parents, we had stuck together through hard times, and I didn't believe Sean would move without saying anything. However, my father was adamant it was a coincidence and to accept the fact that Sean didn't like me as much as I thought. Kai's father called to ensure I would accept the invitation by giving my father a sob story about how Kai struggled to make friends and that his doctor mother had abandoned the family. It didn't matter what I wanted, and without evidence to prove my case, I had to go whether I liked it or not. Kai's street was full of houses with hedged gardens and water features, making it hard not to feel intimidated. Driving down the neighborhood, my father's eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen, and he whistled when Kai's house came into view. "Wouldn't it be nice to live here?" my dad said, hitting the buzzer and waiting for a response on the other end. After a few minutes, my teeth began to chatter from the cold, the sound moving my father into action. "Probably didn't hear us," he said, hitting the button again. After another moment, the intercom crackled and Kai's voice came out on the other end. "Mike, is that..." The intercom fell silent for a moment, and an excited man's voice came booming out. "Welcome, Michael. Mr. Smith, come on in," the voice greeted as the door clicked open and we stepped into a foyer littered with paintings, statues, and other decor a lower-class child saw no value in. My father was busy gushing over the decor when Mr. Sanderson appeared with Kai behind him. "Thank you for coming to Kai's sleepover," Mr. Sanderson said, kneeling down and extending his hand toward me. The man was well-groomed and nicely dressed, at a similar age to my father, who in comparison was sporting a 5 o'clock shadow and sweatpants. After shaking his hand, Mr. Sanderson smiled, though his attempt at being pleasant still felt uncomfortable. "Go have fun, you two. I'll speak with your father before he leaves," Mr. Sanderson said. "Bye, Mike," my father said, waving goodbye as Mr. Sanderson ushered him into the living room. I remember Scooby-Doo had recently aired, and the deeper Kai led me, the more it resembled a backdrop of one of the creepy mansions they had in their episodes. Without a word, I handed Kai his birthday present. It was the Evel Knievel stunt cycle, one of the must-have presents that I hoped to get for my birthday. "Thanks," Kai said with an expressionless look on his face. I was in the middle of rolling my eyes at the unimpressed reaction when I heard a voice greet me from behind. "Hello, Mike." The voice struggled between breaths. I turned to see a frail boy in a large, clunky wheelchair with a large oxygen tank attached to the back. "Michael, this is my older brother John," Kai introduced without making eye contact with either of us. "I didn't know you had a brother," I replied, preoccupied with trying to listen to my father's conversation. He was doing the loud, fake adult laugh, while Mr. Sanderson continued his upbeat chatter. "Nothing's that damn funny." "Yes, they don't talk about me," John said, pausing between each word to take a breath. My father called a final goodbye from the foyer, and the door clicked shut, signaling his departure. A creepy smile spread across John's face, giving me the same off feeling that his father did, but less charming. "Here to stay?" John asked. "He's starting, we need to hide," Kai said, jolting into action and attempting to drag me from John. I tried freeing myself from Kai's grip, but could see something deep within his eyes I couldn't identify. John let out a wheezy laugh and repeated, "Here to stay?" It was a statement, not a question. "Dad!" I cried as Kai continued to pull at my arm. Mr. Sanderson's footsteps came thumping toward the living room. "You started already?" he said, interrupting John's countdown. "You're a greedy boy, Johnny." I looked back with a desperate false hope that Mr. Sanderson would put a stop to what was happening. Instead, he raised both hands over his eyes and John restarted his countdown, both wearing the creepy smile they shared with each other. 10, 9... Kai pulled me into the adjoining room with a large floral print sofa. Tearing off the pillows, he revealed a hole, large enough for a person to fit into, and gestured for me to hide. We exchanged glances and I got a sense of what I'd seen in his eyes. It was empathy. "Ready or not," John called with a wheezy laugh that turned into a coughing fit. "Here we come," Mr. Sanderson called, finishing the sentence for his son. Kai's footsteps rushed across the room and the sound of the closet door shut behind him. The first few moments were quiet. but as John got closer, I could hear the electric motor in his wheelchair humming. "Here!" John squealed with excitement. The door opposite of our room burst open and John shouted excited orders to his father. "Closet! Under bed!" The sound of objects crashing against walls followed as John's father obeyed his orders. The room went quiet, and we held our breath as the silence broke with the hum of John's wheelchair. "Here!" The door flung open and I held in a scream as John shouted orders again to his father. "TV! Curtain! Bed!" His father moved through the room, throwing everything out of his way as he searched. "Closet!" The closet door banged open and Kai yelped. Covering my mouth, I waited to see what would happen. "You're really bad at this, kid," Mr. Sanderson said. "Please, stop," Kai screamed. "In this room?" I heard the hum of John's wheelchair grow closer, and his heavy breathing felt as though it was blowing into my ears. I held my own breath and closed my eyes until I heard the chair move out of the room. "Sofa," John said. Mr. Sanderson pulled the cushions from the sofa and confronted me with a toothy smile. "Good find, son," he said to John as he salivated over the excitement of his catch. "Again!" Mr. Sanderson threw me across the carpet and I tried to crawl towards the door to escape. John's chair was blocking the exit and I looked up with pleading eyes. He smiled again, reversing his chair and allowing me to leave. Kai followed, pulling me back to my feet as we headed into the living room. John's countdown started again. 10, 9... I ran from the living room to the front door, attempting to rattle the handle open. It was locked. "Wait," Kai called, chasing after me. My plans didn't involve waiting, and I ran in the opposite direction, through the kitchen and to another door. When I opened the door, I found a staircase leading down into the basement. Realizing my mistake, I decided to turn around, before hearing Mr. Sanderson call, "Ready or not, here we come." Panic set in. I ran down to the bottom of the stairs, where the ground turned to linoleum flooring. In the middle of the room sat a large surgical table. The source of the light was coming from a standing steel lamp in the corner. Next to it was a hospital bed covered in clean white sheeting and surrounded by large, bulky metal machines. At first, I didn't recognize him, but after a moment, I realized who I was looking at. Tucked under the sheets lay my best friend Sean. I could feel tears running down my cheeks as I stared at his pale and sunken face. The sound of metal hitting metal stirred from the bottom of the bed, and I stepped forward to check on him. The metal sound became louder, and a disheveled woman rushed towards me out of the shadows with her arms outstretched. Her hands clawed for my arm, but her body flew backwards. Frozen with fear, I watched her mouth open to speak. "Kai?" she asked in a raspy voice. Kai appeared from behind and pulled on my arm, causing me to stumble into a tray sitting on the operating table. Medical instruments scattered across the floor, and the footsteps upstairs turned toward the basement. "Behind here," Kai said, directing me near some boxes. I watched the woman reach for something lying on the floor from behind them. "Protect yourselves," the woman whispered, sliding a metal object across the floor. It came into view a few meters from our hiding spot, and I clambered on all fours to reach it. My hands wrapped around the object as I heard the footsteps hit the bottom of the stairs. "Where are they?" Mr. Sanderson screamed. "I know they're down here." The lights flipped on and the entire room filled with light. I had made it back in time and looked down to see the item I had risked my life for was a scalpel. The light filling the room did little to make the scene less gruesome. A chain on the woman's ankle had been attached to the bed where Sean lay. With his eyes closed, he resembled a corpse. "Why are you doing this to us?" the woman whimpered. "To our own son, too." "How do you not understand by now that he is not my son?" Mr. Sanderson's voice was now deeper and hate-filled. "John would have his brother's kidneys, but instead we had to use this kid." "We don't have to do anything. You don't have to do this. Just let the boys go," the woman pleaded. "Do you know the best part, Jill? The best part? This will keep happening. Every year. Over and over again. It's not even about John anymore, honey. It's just so goddamn fun to see you upset. How will you sleep with all this blood on your hands?" Mr. Sanderson turned and approached our direction as we held each other's hand. With each step growing nearer, our grip became tighter and our hushed breaths more rapid. His presence was so violent and terrifying you could physically feel it. "Of course he isn't yours. I hated you," Kai's mother screamed. "Shut up," Mr. Sanderson screamed back. "You're a coward, George," she continued, provoking him. "Don't be a hero," Mr. Sanderson snarled as he turned from our hiding spot and headed back towards her. The sound of full-weighted punching and kicking and the woman's screams echoed in the basement. I felt Kai's grip on my hand loosen, the sad look disappeared, and his jaw clenched, revealing a new look, one of rage. Snatching the scalpel, Kai charged at Mr. Sanderson, plunging it into his leg. Shrieking with pain, Mr. Sanderson dropped to one knee and he turned to Kai with a look of pure evil shimmering in his eyes. It was a disturbing glint of fiery hate and burning rage, calling for absolute and brutal destruction. A saliva-filled scream followed, and he grabbed the collar of Kai's shirt, pulling him closer. It all happened so fast, and in seconds Mr. Sanderson's neck jerked backwards. Kai's mother had wrapped the ankle chain around his neck and dug her knees into his back, using all her strength to pull downward. Releasing Kai's collar, Mr. Sanderson struggled to free himself from the chain now wrapped around his neck. Wasting no time, Kai picked up the medical tray that I had knocked over and swung it into Mr. Sanderson's face. Realizing it was my chance to escape and call for help, I ran towards the bottom of the stairs before slipping in Mr. Sanderson's blood. For the second time that night, I was on all fours looking up to see John blocking the doorway. Only this time, he was watching the scene with the perfect view down into the basement. The desperate gurgled breaths of his father's purple face sputtered and gasped for air. John was pale. The arrogant, sinister smile had vanished as he watched the events take place. A visible fear came over him when he saw me coming up the stairs, and in a panic he attempted to lock the door. Using all my weight, I collided with the door, slamming it open and knocking John off his wheelchair. I ran through the house and escaped through a window that had been left open in their study, and continued running, covered in blood, and screaming for help. A police cruiser noticed and drove up the street as I tried to wave them down. When the officer became visible, I could see he was shaking his head, and though I continued to wave, he ignored it and headed towards the house I had come from. A house down the street took me in and called the police and my father. My father arrived before the police, and the neighbor informed him they already had an officer on the scene. The neighbor showed interest in the gossip, but my father dismissed it all, telling her I did this all the time, a child's crazy imagination, and some other lies. I'm certain they couldn't have believed that he was telling them the truth. On the way home, it felt as though my presence was more unwelcome than usual. He silenced my protests and continued to drive in silence as I cried over what I'd just experienced. What happened should have been on every television in America that night, but nothing ever came of it. I didn't learn what happened after that night. However, I did learn what my life was worth to an unhappy single parent. A new life in a penthouse apartment across the country, and a brand new Pontiac Firebird to take you there.